what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Good evening, fellow occupiers, and welcome to episode 44 of Occupy TV. I'm here with Susan Strong, and one would think with a name like that she would be some Marvel superhero, and in her own right she is. And she has written a book on how to communicate with people in America, and it's basically the value thing. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Joe was saying, I have written a book called Move Our Message, How to Get America's Ear, and it's based on the idea that we have to speak in language that mainstream Americans understand to get our messages out. And I have a website also, metaphorproject.org, which is, you might say, an earlier version of the book. The resources there are just a little bit earlier in time than the ones in the book, which is the most up-to-date version. But lots and lots of activists have used the resources on our site over the years. It's been up since 2000 to do what I call American framing, and that is shaping your message using the language, the metaphors, the idioms, the images, the catchphrases that are part of American cultural dialogue and the stories that Americans resonate to. An example would be the phrase, play by the rules. Okay. And that's a phrase that was reintroduced into political dialogue back in the beginning of 2010 when the financial regulation bill started to be worked on in Congress. And I could see that the word regulation was going to be up there. And of course, that's a Republican word. And they use it to make people scared. Regulation will strangle business, et cetera, et cetera. And this was one example where if we could get in early enough with other language, then maybe the Democrats and everybody else who was working on the issue could avoid using Republican language, the language of the right. So we put out, reminded people about saying rules, not regulation. And of course, rules puts you into a completely different story, American story and context. It's about fairness and about playing by the same rules, everyone playing by the same rules.
But I would think that a phrase like that would have been co-opted, say, and I vaguely remember it coming out a few times during the Reagan administration.
Well, of course, these things are there, and they can use them too, but in this particular case, it looks like the right wasn't interested in well, they didn't get there first with it.
Yeah, it happened long, long ago. It's just the question of co-opting it.
Well, I mean, at this time, however, since 2010, they have continued to use the word regulation, and they haven't really gone for rules. And there's a good reason, because play by the rules actually evokes the sports metaphor, which is very important, as you know, in American culture. And that's about something that really also resonates with a deeper American ideal, and that is everybody obeying the rule of law. And so they have reasons, I think the right has reasons why they don't want to use rules right now. And we've made it a democratic and a popular and a grassroots word now. So it doesn't matter what happened in the Reagan, it's what happened now.
So let's take it a little bit lower, okay? Because what you're talking about is kind of a little higher understanding. But let's talk about framing, let's talk about values, let's talk about how people react. And one of the things that people on the left do is they work with facts. Okay? But the facts tend to bounce off in the sense that if you're not working with the values that the people that you're talking to hold, then the facts will just bounce off.
That's right, and that's now been proven through the latest cognitive research, cognitive science research, that facts and statistics do not sink in deeply. They don't. It's your
They work for me.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, one of the things that is a problem, and that is, I think, for people on the left, that does work. But there's evidence that it's secondary. It's a secondary response. That we too have an emotional response, but we, in a sense, are persuaded that we are persuaded by the facts and the statistics. But we do have an emotional response first, because we're coming from a different emotional story, as Lakoff has laid out. Now, the thing about framing in a way that will reach the widest mainstream audience is that you have to tell a story. And Lakoff has been writing recently about, well, it has to be a moral story. And he's right. And we do want to be conveying the best American values, those that evoke the ideal American identity story. It's also true that your story can't be very long if you're trying to reach the great American public.
Yeah.
And so you need to have a very short one, and that means a metaphor. And that's where we get back to play by the rules, because that is a tiny phrase that evokes a big story that everyone knows. And it's a moral story because it's about being fair. So the trick, you might say, for us on the left is, number one, to be willing to go to the step of learning how to do American framing and be willing to let go of our habitual process of using facts, statistics, talking points, and so on, or a long story. The only people who can get away with a long story are politicians who have a captive audience listening to a speech. And I think Occupy has been a wonderful example of the power of very short phrases. You know, the 1%, the 99%, that went everywhere, and it changed the narrative context for American politics completely. It's a beautiful example. In a lot of ways, I feel like I've written this book. You are the people I've been waiting for, you might say, in terms of writing the book, and because it's about grassroots, bottom-up framing. And about learning to do it yourself. And I've created the tools and the resources and the actual American framing steps. It's a message builder, and it's there for people to use themselves.
So let's use an example.
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that's happened as a result of Occupy is that we're attempting to get a homeless village opened.
Yes.
And you can imagine the opposition and what they say about homeless people. So how do you frame, can you give us some examples of how you would frame it or figure out how to frame a message to essentially sell a homeless village?
Well, let's put it this way. I do not actually do this stuff off the cuff because I follow my own process. So what I would
let's go through the process.
I'll talk with you about the process, and this is the beauty of what I have been teaching, which is teaching people how to do it, empowering people, capacity building. So, okay, how would you do it? Well, usually the first thing I ask people to do in the American framing steps, which are in this book, as well as on the website. The most complete version is in the book, and so what you would do would be to start out thinking about your audience. Who is your audience? What are they thinking? What are their goals? How do they feel? And here's a piece that very often people who are doing professional polling don't do, and that is, what language do they use about the issue? And what metaphors come up when you talk with them? There's a classic question you can ask: what's the problem around here? And the metaphors will pop up.
Well, let's talk about the question of why are people homeless. Okay, if you look at the opposition, they're homeless because they're undisciplined, because they're lazy, because they're immoral, they don't care, they're not willing to get a job, they're not contributing members of society, all that kind of stuff. And now we have a counterpoint, which is, for example, let's take the homeless break into groups, and we have, say, the street kids. Now, where did the street kids come from? Well, they made a decision that moving out of their family is, you know, and living on the streets in the rain and the cold, getting harassed by the police and, you know, shunned by people is preferable to being in their family. And why is that? Well, you have molestation, you have beatings, you have alcoholic, rageaholic parents, you have, you know, all of that kind of stuff that gets people out of the house. But so you say, okay, well, we need to find a place for these people to, you know, get their lives back together, shall we say? No, let them die in the streets. That kind of stuff.
Well, I think you can also add to what you've already put out there, the idea that there isn't any sort of out, because those people are going to impact the system anyway. And so you might as well help them get up one rung and then the next rung and the next rung, so that they become independent, self-supporting individuals.
So in other words, we can continue to spend, well, right now there's 9 cops downtown. And if you take the whole police budget, divide it by the number of people on the street, okay, it's $250,000 per cop for salaries, supervision, equipment, training, records keeping, everything else.
You're cooking, yeah.
Okay, so 9 cops times $250,000 is $2.2 million.
Exactly.
And if you look at the non-vehicular citations, well over half of them, in fact, the vast majority, are for status crimes, for sleeping on a grid, criminal trespass 2, leaning against a building, criminal trespass 2, you know, failure to use a pedestrian signal, something that people with money, myself included, do all the time. You know,
right.
This is a small city, low traffic downtown, and when the time comes, if there's nobody coming, people go across the street.
Right.
But if you're homeless, you get a ticket.
Yes.
Okay.
And that costs money to the city.
It costs money to do that. So in other words, we've spent literally millions of dollars over the past, you know, however long, to get rid of the homeless.
Right, yeah, and there's no such thing as rid.
Yeah, because there's no place for them to go, because every place is the same. And so we still have the homeless. I mean, we've been spending these millions of dollars, and they're still there.
You're talking their language. Yes, that's good.
Then what happens is the Occupy camp opens. We have 300 of them come stay with us for free meals, toilets, and a safe place to sleep. And suddenly crime drops 90%.
Interesting.
It's like, oh, you give them a place to be, less status crimes, maybe we could put the police doing something more useful.
Yes.
Okay, so how's that work for a story?
That's a very good story. In fact, the step that I recommend after thinking about the opposition and where they're coming from and what their arguments is creating your own problem-solving story. Now, a lot of communication consultants suggest that you should identify villains and heroes and so on. I think that's all good and you should do it, but I think that even more important for the American people is the problem-solving idea. What is the problem-solving solution? Because, and I think that's one thing that's happening in our country across the board, and that is people are really sick of the political infighting and no problem-solving. You know, absolute refusal to solve our problems. So having a problem-solving story is the next step. Now, once you have your problem-solving story, then I usually recommend that people look through the other set of tools and resources on the site or in the book, which are the American Story Elements and or the American Metaphor Categories list. There are 2 lists of basically nuggets of the American story.
So let's give some examples.
Okay, let me now turn to the right page, because I can actually give people a little bit more of a taste of what that would be if I can find the page. Anyway, I can't find the page, so quickly. So I'll give an example of...
We have time. We have time.
Okay, all right. It's...
so, metaphors.
No, it's actually... Oh, I know why I can't find it, because it's in the back. Here we go. It appears twice in the book, and I chose the one in the back. So the one thing that I often start with is something called the American Dream. That's a story element, and there are 7 of these. There's the American Dream, the American Nation.
So what is the American Dream?
I'll get back to it in a minute.
Okay.
And then there's an element called Free to Succeed, and another one called We're on a Roll, Small Town Security, Man to Superman, and the American Nightmare. So the American Dream, as I like to write about it, is not just the house with a little white picket fence. It's about who we are as a people in terms of our problem-solving capabilities. That is, we are the people who like to try things that are new. We will have the energy to keep trying to solve a problem. We believe we can solve problems if we just work hard and try new things and try this and try that.
It's the new things part that's important.
It's the new things that's important. Also, that we are the can-do people, and that we can reinvent, and I have a list here, reinvent, redeem, renew, rebuild, fix, restore, whatever needs to be done,
right.
We can do it because we are the people who can do that sort of thing. We're the new idea people and have been since the beginning of our country. So that's what I like to see people focus on in terms of the American dream. Because I think the idea that it's about consuming things is much more recent, really, almost Second World War. After the Second World War.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's when they really started pushing that.
Yeah, they had to change the entire way, because that was my grandparents' generation and my parents that went through the Great Depression.
Yes.
They saved things. They fixed things.
Absolutely.
Okay, they kept them going. Okay,
And they solved the problems.
Exactly. They didn't go out and buy new stuff.
Right. So anyway, what the step is to look at that list of the American story elements, and then the American metaphor categories list, which is actually our most popular resource. And there are 18 of those categories: sports, science, the economy, and of course, you know, the economy is full of metaphors. It grows, it explodes, it booms, it shrinks. You know, it's a balloon. It tanks.
Action verbs.
Yes, action verbs. And the idea is that you go through those lists just thinking in a kind of casual way at first about what appeals to you. And these lists are not, of course, everything in the American story or everything in the lexicon of American metaphors, but they are designed to stimulate what you already know yourself, because we all know this stuff. It's in there. And the examples of actual words, again, are not everything. They're designed to trigger you to think of what you might have as an idea that comes up for you. And you can use what's in there, or you can come up with something else, but it kind of gets the process going. And then, I generally speaking suggest that people take a break. You know, go off, get a cup of coffee, whatever needs to happen, 10 minutes at least. And because what we're trying to do is shift the gears so that you go from the analytic mode, which is really left brain, to the right brain mode, which is more thinks in metaphors and thinks in sort of big pictures. And that shift is what you need to bring all this kind of preparation that you've been doing in the first steps of the American framing steps into the brainstorming process that follows. So the brainstorming process, that's the second part of the American framing steps, is not just kind of off-the-wall brainstorming. It's very much prepared brainstorming. So then the process goes on to brainstorm, combining your problem-solving story with the language that you've selected or the metaphors that you've selected from those two lists, or that have come to you as you're thinking about it. Yeah.
So to some extent, you're suggesting that the right brain may be in more control than we tend to realize?
That I'm not sure I would want to go so far as to say. I would want to have some scientific backup on, and I don't have it off the top. I don't have that on the shelf. But I do know that there's new research that shows how the two parts of the brain do their work. And the part that is the left brain tends to do things analytically,
verbally,
and step by step. I think they're both verbal, but in different ways. Okay. And the right brain is more the place where we get flashes of insight.
Yeah.
Everything comes together, and there's fascinating new research about that that shows that feels like an instantaneous process, but it's a way in which the brain apparently networks a lot of different things together in our brains, and then there's this flash.
But it would respond. I would think the right brain would respond more to images than the left.
It certainly does, yes, but it's also very well evoked by things that you're addressing with the left brain, and the research is that if you start with a left brain process, analyzing and so on step by step, and then you kind of hit this moment where, like, this is too hard, it's too difficult, I don't know how to do this, there's kind of like a gear shift in the brain to the right side, which sees the forest. The left side sees the trees. And so that's what we're trying to build toward in the American Framing Steps, that moment where the shift occurs and the networking happens in the brain. You bring together all these things that you've been thinking about, your understanding of how the audience you're trying to reach thinks and talks, and also your problem-solving story and the ideas that you've picked from the various lists, the American Framing Story lists. And bring that all together, and then have this moment where it comes together in the brainstorming process as moments of insight. And I usually recommend that people spend at least an hour doing that brainstorming process, because it warms up, and then people come up with their own catchphrases or metaphors that will actually carry the message out so much further. You know how today we have so many wonderful tools for getting a phrase out there, as Occupy knows, through social networking, the viral process.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of what our social networking has done has degenerated into people having these battles and such. So I don't know, I kind of look at some of the Facebook stuff that goes on. Some of it's good, most of it kind of turns into battles.
Well, but how did Occupy get 1% and 99% out? I mean, certainly that started with the occupations.
Those kinds
and
of
the video, the video and the rest. But the process spread beyond New York in such an amazing way, and that was through social networking to a considerable degree. And I think what happens is that, yes, you're right about maybe run-of-the-mill everyday stuff on Twitter or on Facebook or other mechanisms or means out there in the social networking world. But I think when things come to a crisis, and there's something really important, and there's a phrase, and that's the thing that you did. If there's a set of phrases that encapsulates the message, I think the system sort of like sets aside all this kind of petty stuff and coalesces and coheres into, let's get this message out everywhere.
So in other words, a lot of it's about inventing bumper stickers.
Well, yes, it is. And the left has been traditionally kind of huffy about cliches or, bumper sticker messaging and so on. But the idea is that you cannot get the attention of the mainstream American public unless you start that way. If you start that way, you get people interested, then there's follow-up that's possible, and then you can get your talking points. You can get a reporter maybe to report your talking points and so on. But to start the process, to encapsulate it, to get it out there, and to get it out there with a phrase that carries the idea sort of complete, like a seed that can unfold. That's what is the first step.
Okay, so invent phrases.
Yes.
Invent a metaphor.
Yes.
Okay.
Or find a metaphor that works.
Find a metaphor.
It's not so much. Sometimes, well, I could go a little further in this direction if you're okay.
Yeah.
And that is, there are fundamentally 3 techniques and for finding or creating the right phrase and metaphor that will work for this, what you're trying to do. And the first one is, you're trying to counter another conventional phrase like regulation. So you pick one that is also part of the conventional lexicon, and that would be play by the rules.
Okay.
Then there's a situation where they've got something that's really sticking in your craw, and you can't figure out how to get around it. You can't come up with something that will be a direct counter, like play by the rules being a direct counter for regulation. What you can do, and this has to be done carefully, you can tweak what they're doing. And an example would be stay the course, Bush's stay the course during the Iraq War.
Yeah.
We launched, we need a course change. So we just tweaked it. We just turned it, took the phrase and did something with it. And that actually took off, partly because it was launched at the right time. But by the time the 2006 election came, somebody asked Bush if he didn't, well, what about you've been saying stay the course all this time? What about the fact that everybody's talking about changing course now? And he actually said, I never said stay the course.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it really gave cover to Petraeus's new strategy of paying the Iraqi chieftains instead of trying to shoot them, which is kind of like a better strategy to pay them. At any rate, so that's an example of tweaking something that they've got out there. Then there's a situation where your message is about something totally new that the public is unfamiliar with but is a danger and is urgent and they need to know about. And the example that was created for that situation was Frankenfood. And of course you're probably familiar with that one.
Oh,
and
yeah.
now, and talk about viral, it's now become Frankenforest and Frankenfish and Frankenbugs and Frankenseeds and just on and on, because it really is so clear and everybody knows about Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So those are examples of the three basic situations where you need to decide which one you're dealing with and whether you're going to just come up with another conventional metaphor that carries your message, or you're going to tweak theirs, or you're going to come up with something totally new. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the homeless thing, and how can we reframe that and make a positive argument there?
Well, I think you did actually have your problem-solving story pretty well lined out, which is, and you're talking the audience's language, which is, this is costing us more, and we can actually improve the situation and help the people get back on their feet.
Because the moral aspect doesn't play at all, or at least that's what I've discovered in talking to people. The fairness stuff, none of that stuff plays. They deserve it because they're bad. And you can't crack that, but the cost one does crack people.
It does.
It's like, okay, how much longer are you willing to pay? Incredible. Throw money into a rat hole.
Exactly.
So that one plays. So do we have any thoughts on other examples that we might want to try? Say on the homeless thing, cracking the homeless thing.
Well, I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, that's the one that is really.
Well, I've made that argument. There's other people who haven't picked up on it, but
what do you mean, other occupiers, or?
Yeah, other occupiers out there doing this kind of thing. They're to a degree arguing the fairness and moral thing. Now that plays while you're going to groups that are already on your side.
Yes.
But it's not going to play as you begin to walk out, to groups that are opposed to you. So it's the issue of getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of rooms with friendly audiences and go talk to some other people.
That's really important.
So,
and
are there other thoughts on how you talk to other people about, say, homelessness?
Well,
I'm going to keep you on the hot seat there.
Oh no, that's all right. That's fine. I think that the fact that when Occupy set up encampments, the crime rate went down is really important, because what you're demonstrating is.
But that just means that the homeless caused all the crime. So now you move them out. Hey, they're not doing the crime because they're not there. Obviously, they were causing the problem to start with. We ought to round them up and shoot them. And I've actually had people say that.
But that brings me to a point which I do like to make, which is. It's better to try to reach people who are what we call independents, or people who are not absolutely totally hardcore right. And people who are maybe not like us exactly completely in terms of their ideas about how things work and what would fix things, but people who are more open to, say, the financial argument, or the argument that we'll save money if we actually help these people. And I think get back on their feet is a good phrase. Yeah, because that suggests that something knocked them down. And
that's a good
and
metaphor.
So in a sense, in terms of blame, people that are really hardcore right are going to say, oh, they're just bad. But if you can point out that in say, individual cases, well, it's something like this job loss happened to this person because of, through no fault of their own, is another phrase that Republicans, the old style Republicans, used to help create legislative options that would really do something to help.
One of the big things that puts them on is healthcare issues or health issues. And you know, it's the sort of 4 out of every 5 bankruptcies is the result of a health issue.
Excellent.
And 4 out of 5 of all of those people had health insurance.
Right.
So how did the system break down and put these people into bankruptcy and ultimately on the streets?
Right.
You know, they paid into the American dream, they bought it, they put their money in, and now suddenly they're not getting the services.
Right, through no fault of their own.
Well, no, but God's punishing them. They did something, and God is getting them for that.
Well, maybe somebody did something,
Yeah.
but in their particular case, maybe they did everything they could. They followed all the rules, and somebody else did not follow the rules up higher. Yeah, I think moving the blame up, which is what Occupy also has been doing, which is very good, is pointing the finger where it actually belongs.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that you can do with that is it's the 1%, but maybe not the burghers of this town who are also kind of trapped in the system.
Yeah.
And maybe don't quite realize yet that the blame, if somebody's got to be the bad guy, it may be people who are in control of the aspects of the system that create people having health insurance but still losing their houses, or losing their houses because people in the banks didn't follow the rules about how to actually frame those mortgage agreements and so on. I mean, if there's going to be blame, move the blame around, and you people are really expert at doing that. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know that I'm so good at it.
Well,
But,
many people in Occupy are.
well,
Yeah.
some. Okay, so more about your book. So how long ago did you actually write this? And I guess you're sort of book touring it. So,
Yes.
So how long have you been at this now?
Well, actually, I started the Metaphor Project in 1997, and that was
Okay.
before we had a website. And it came out of my own background and my experience, because I have a combined background. I actually taught at the college level in rhetoric and communications departments. And then I went on and worked as a communication consultant for a while, and was also very involved in progressive activism. I was involved with the Freeze campaign back there in the 80s, and then also when it became saying freeze for a while, people used to say, is that ice cream?
Yeah, right.
And then it'd be Peace Action, of course. So I was very involved with that group as a volunteer leader, and then I actually went professional and worked for an organization called the Center for Economic Conversion, and did creating materials for them and writing op-eds and the rest. And as I was working with them, that was in the 90s, and we had this feeling that we were going to be able to focus on the environmental crisis because the Cold War was coming to an end. And I had, in the line of my work, a lot of opportunities to work with people who were working on environmental sustainability. And one of the things I noticed then, that was when I first realized, ooh, there's a real language problem here. Because particularly people who worked on environmental issues in that particular decade were focused so entirely on facts and statistics and so on. So listening to their framing, looking at it, I just felt these people really need to learn how to reach the American public. And because of my combined background, I really felt, I began to really feel called to do this work. And so, as I said, we started doing some experiments with workshops in '97, and the first website went up in 2000. And the book is essentially almost like the fourth draft of the website, because I've been continually tinkering with it, rewriting the website. In fact, one of my nephews said to me a couple of years ago, he said, "You're writing a book online." So this is the latest, and this is the most complete, most accessible version, and most up to date.
So where are you based?
Actually, in the San Francisco Bay Area.
San Francisco. Okay. And so you're going up and down the coast. How long have you been on this tour?
Well, actually, this particular leg that has brought me to Eugene has been the result of a family reunion here. And I have been actually in June in the East Coast. And so that's how it's working right now. Yeah. And we'll be going back down to the Bay Area and then planning new activities.
So how well has this been received?
people are liking it a lot. The people who really love this book are the people for whom it was written. And the activists, the grassroots people, the people who want to do their own and need to do their own framing. Not the people who are kind of waiting for some professional to kind of hand down something that everybody uses. And we're going into the most acute phase of the election. And that will be dominated by the framing that the Democratic Party decides they want and the Republican Party wants. But I think that people like you, the people in Occupy, the people who are doing grassroots bottom-up work, understand that we cannot let up even through the election campaign, and certainly not beyond, because no matter who wins, the grassroots needs to rise, and and we need to do our own framing. It's clear that Occupy was better than the guys, in Washington that are sitting in their offices. And there are a lot of people who are political consultants who are actually on the Metaphor Project Network list. I have an email list that is free to join, and I send out a post once a month suggesting some metaphors or languages for a current issue, and there are a lot of political consultants on my list. And the model of the Metaphor Project is that we're an educational nonprofit. So we don't work with campaigns or political candidates, and we give it away, except for special cases where I do a workshop or I'm working individually with a group. But in terms of publicizing the website, I also blog on Op-Ed News and Daily Kos, and just get the word out and tweet and so on.
So let's take it back a little bit. I sort of came into understanding some of this stuff through George Lakoff. I read several of his books. I really don't consider him to be a particularly good writer. It's he occasionally, and some days he's really lucid. I mean, he just explains things incredibly well. Other days you walk away feeling a little confused. I've actually videotaped him a couple times at various events. But one of the things that he talked about was certainly the Powell letter and its influence on corporate think tanks.
Yes.
And specifically about the Luntz Institute, Frank Luntz, and the sort of right-wing language manual.
Right.
That's where things like compassionate conservative and no child left behind.
They're good. They're good.
Clean skies, healthy forests, all of those kinds of things, which are, absolute Orwellian lies. I mean, in every case, it's, no child left behind was never funded. Clear skies means more pollution. Healthy forests means more clear cutting, and so on and so on. And if conservatives were compassionate, why would they need the adjective? Clean coal's another one like that.
Yes.
But they are really good at that.
They're very good at it.
They spend, millions, if not billions of dollars a year on manufacturing these kinds of images and frames and phrases and all the rest of it. And so we're way behind on that particular curve. And so the whole thing about this is all of these things apply to a value. In the sense that if you have a phrase or a framing, it's underlaid by a value. So
that's right.
Let's talk about values, the stuff at the bottom, and how we penetrate down into that. Another area where I'm looking is, say, single-payer health care, and trying to penetrate into the public, psyche in terms of understanding that. So I assume you've probably been presented with that one before. So let's apply some of the ideas you're doing to, say, that problem.
Well, let me start with single payer, because that's a particular concern of mine in terms of how the left has been framing it. But going deeper into your question, yes, the right is very good at coming up with phrases that are deceptive. I mean, it's we could look at it in a way where we see the two parts. The first part is they're really good at finding the language that will resonate with Americans. They use it to cover up and to lie.
Right.
Now, lots of people on the left have been resistant to our coming up with what I call American truth bites,
Yeah.
because they say, well, they use it to lie. Well, we have
So
to
they're
use
manipulating, so we don't want to manipulate.
we don't want to do anything like what they're doing because they use it to lie. Well, I can understand. It's an emotional reaction. It's
Yeah.
visceral. But if we're going to succeed, then we have to learn to use the American framing technique to tell the truth, the American
Yeah.
truth bites. So, you know, we got that past that point here.
Well, I'm not sure. So let's stay on there for just a little bit.
well-
in you know, is it okay? I mean, manipulation exists. If you're manipulating people to a bad place or manipulating them to a good place, is there a moral issue there?
Well, I think that's based on the idea that using a phrase like, say, Medicare for all,
Yeah.
is manipulation. It's not. It's just simply using a short phrase to describe what you mean. And you have to understand that we have new knowledge now about how the brain works and how the brain processes language and information.
Right.
And so the thing that's kind of ironic is I think the left prides itself on listening to science. But in this one area, because of their own self-image, they tend not to be listening to the latest
Right.
science. And there are things that make my heart just break. Poor George Lakoff is constantly saying, don't use their language. I mean, he's been writing about that for
Yeah.
8 years. Don't use their language. And it's still like, you know, this is based on science. Don't
Yeah.
use their words. So we need to kind of get up to speed on understanding that doing the kind of thing that I'm talking about is not manipulating, it's actually moving in harmony with the way that science shows us the brain works.
Yeah.
And the real issue is, are we using it to tell the truth or not?
Yeah.
That's the real issue. And are we using it to express the value that we want to express? So let's get back to the whole question of Medicare for all versus single payer. This is something that I've been concerned about in terms of the framing of it, the language, for a long time.
Yeah.
People use the phrase single payer, but most of the public doesn't have any idea what
Yeah,
that means.
that works in the circles that understand it, but it doesn't. You
Yeah.
go out into the rest of the population; they're clueless.
That they absolutely, and it not only doesn't help, it hurts because it's confusing and, well, is the single payer me? You know, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
don't do that. And the phrase that is the alternate out there, Medicare for all, is much better because everybody understands what Medicare is.
Yeah.
And most people are kind of looking forward until, I mean, you don't look forward to aging, but on the other hand, there's Medicare.
Yeah,
So,
I thought they framed it fairly nicely in California with the One Care campaign.
well, there again, yes, it's
It's a little
better,
more obscure, but
it's a little
but it's
better
better.
than single payer. But I also think that it's still like One Care. No, I think they probably need to do a little more work on.
Yeah.
And since I don't do this stuff off the cuff or for people, I teach people how to do it. I'm not
Right.
going to make a suggestion about exactly what they should do. But I do think, and I feel okay doing it because, unlike some people, I actually have the resources. They're on our website and they're in the book. So, you know, I may not say do this, but I'm saying go there and learn how to do it yourself and come up with something, and maybe yours will be the one that goes viral and shifts the whole national narrative.
It's perfectly okay to do to hold it up and be proud of it. But yeah. Okay, so need another phrase. So Medicare for all, you think is better, but not great.
Well, I
So
think
any
it's
thoughts
pretty
on
good.
what would a phrase that was great? You know, what characteristics would it have? Not that it's been invented yet.
Well, it has to be something that is immediately accessible
Okay.
to people. It has to be part of the ideal American story that is everybody knows, and it has to be part of the set of values. We were talking about values. That is the set of, you might say, general values that everybody in America accepts. It's when you get down to applying them that things get to be difficult.
Americans is a caring community. Stuff like that. A caring people, a caring country.
I really wonder if that's the rock bottom value that we...
So what would the value be then?
I think,
What do you think?
I think that I'm not going to actually go too far down this path because I've just been having this queasy feeling and I haven't really dealt with what we should be doing instead. But I think that having the idea be so basic that we're caring people, I think that we care about each other as in being part of a community, seeing ourselves as the American community is a much more familiar way to talk about what I think some people are trying to express by talking about Americans as caring. I think more Americans think of themselves as community-minded or being supportive of the community or having the community be a good community and a healthy community and so on, adjectives like that. So I think that that's a much more familiar idea and more widespread in terms of crossing some of the political boundaries. And it's a question of what phrase you pick up to carry that meaning. And so I think that that's an important piece of foundation for our work. And yes, we do need to base our work on values, but we have to understand that you can't, in a sense, talk about the names of the values, because just imagine, say you are doing election work and you go up to the door and you say, and maybe you encounter a Republican or an independent and you say, well, you know, we're for responsibility. Well, they say, we are too, we're more responsible than you. You know, so you have to have a story that actually encapsulates what that means, and that's what I think something like Play by the Rules does. It pulls up a whole story that is the context, and you don't have to explain because everybody knows what it means in that setting. So that's the essence, I would say, of what I've been trying to teach people, which is you have to get to the place where you have the shortest version of the story, which is a metaphor, short phrase. And I'll give you a few more examples. Another example would be a phrase that we floated out there during, I think it was 2007, when Bush was trying to ramp up support for attacking Iran then. Yeah. And so we floated a phrase out there, choose the cool it option. You know how they're always talking about having all the options on the table? Yeah. Well, so we said choose the cool it option. And that was one of those tweak theirs versions. But it also used phrasing that was very familiar as part of slang, cool it. And as time went on, major politicians started to say, well, we need to cool the rhetoric and, you know, so on. So that got going out there, and is a good example of what I'm talking about in terms of conveying a value by a short phrase that encapsulates a story and sinks into the brain quickly, calls up a picture, and is easily accessible. And of course, once you get people talking about cooling it, then you could say, well, who wanted to know more? Well, how do we cool it? Well, then you've got your talking points and the rest. But it's really, really important to have that very compressed story that that actually embodies the value.
So would this be sort of a neuro-linguistic programming frame-breaking statement type thing, or is that what
I think you could say that, yes. Yeah. But neurolinguistics is a little bit different from cognitive science, and I don't feel that I'm that deeply versed in neurolinguistics to make a statement like that. But I do know enough about cognitive science to know that you really are dealing with a situation where you want to get something that will be accessed directly, because apparently there are, you know, two systems, not just the right and the left, but and they may be actually.
So maybe rather than breaking, what we're looking is something that opens it.
Good, that's wonderful. See, now you just came up with the right language.
Okay.
We can do it. Yes, they've got their paid consultants and lunch and all the rest, and lots of money that's being put into that sort of thing. But there are so many more of us, and we are creative Americans.
So tell our viewers about Frank Luntz.
Frank Luntz. Well, Frank Luntz is, as they probably know, the most famous American spinmeister, and he has a big operation, very well funded, and the stuff that he comes up with using focus groups and very complicated techniques of actually bringing ordinary people in and asking them what they think. This is what's funny about it. He's actually going back to the same well that is actually the same as us. We are the well. He's going back to the public. Any rate, once he gets his material, then it's disseminated top down through their network, and they all use it. And I guess this gets back to the point that you wanted to discuss, which was message discipline. Now, the thing is, of course, they've said that people on the left are resistant to top down anything. And
people on the right take the advice.
They do. Well, they do, and they are very consistent. But it's like herding cats on the left, right? But our process is different, and I think one of the things that, again, Occupy has manifested is ours is a bottom-up process, and if it's good enough, you know, it goes. And we now have this new capability, which is the social networking capability, to make things go viral much faster. And the example of what Occupy Wall Street did in New York is perfect. And that wonderful move where they had projected the 99% on the building. Again, that's sort of wonderful, creative, activist, media event type of creation has enormous power. And so our process is different, but we can get it out there, and we are dealing with the most sophisticated system of media ownership on the right that we've ever seen. So again, the triumph of creating newsworthy events that breaks through that media blockade has been demonstrated by your people. And
took them a while to start covering Occupy, but eventually they had a problem ignoring it.
Yes. So creativity and the ability of people to, on our side, to look at something and say, oh, that's really good, let's use that. You know, so in a sense, we are our own enormous focus group.
Right.
And everybody can participate in using the sort of thing that's in my book and on the website. We can participate in that process, that creative ferment of coming up with something that will then go viral.
Okay, so we got about another 7 minutes.
Yes.
Where do you want to take it from here? What do you think we should talk about?
Well, I'm interested in what happened at the national gathering. I wasn't there, of course, and know that there was a very long vision document, and I think that there were a lot of skill shares and so on, and I'm hoping that in that process some moves were made in the direction of using what I've been putting out there, and I know that people tell people about my work and also about the book and the website, and I'm hoping that people will be ready to take the step of looking at framing for the mainstream deliberately, kind of figure out what can we say that will again go viral in the web, because we need more of that kind of energy as we're going into the election. I think a lot of people are going into this election in a kind of heartbroken way.
Oh yeah.
And very fearful. I mean, terrified about what the outcome might be, because the Republicans are pulling every trick out of the hat to actually do things like prevent people from voting, you know, all, just the whole range.
Well, we've seen that. We've seen that for years. It's just intensifying.
That's right. So I think that the idea that the grassroots groups in our country are continuing on, have plans, are going to carry on and keep that pressure up no matter what happens. There's hope. It's coming from the people. So I think that's the thing that is
okay. There's hope. It's coming from the people.
Yes.
A nice way to put it. Yeah, I guess the question on this election is how much interest it'll generate. I mean, Obama has kind of disappointed a lot of his base constituencies. And so while Mitt Romney, to me, looks a whole lot worse, to put it mildly, you know, still Obama has, you know, has not shined, shall we say.
Well, you have to think about how he was situated when he came in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he had the economy collapsing, and that was something that got started.
Continue to do that.
Yeah, it is, and that's something that was started by the Bush administration and before. And
yeah, we actually had a slight surplus in terms of national deficit when George came into office.
Exactly.
Reasonably good employment, the middle class was actually doing okay.
That's
Could have
right.
been doing better. Could have been doing a lot better. But it was actually doing okay, and it really got nailed.
Exactly. And then of
And
course
Romney is likely to nail it further.
that's right. And so that was partly what was on Obama's plate. And then there were 2 wars going on that he hadn't started, that the Democrats hadn't started. And then there was what was happening in Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was overwhelming. I think that the statistics are that no U.S. president ever came into office with so many. I mean, FDR had depression and then war, but Obama had to come at him from more directions.
Yeah.
And also the Republican Party has changed. It's not the Republican Party that we remember from before Reagan.
There was such a thing as a Republican moderate back in the old days.
Absolutely, yes. And so that's the other situation. Grover Norquist rose up and corralled all these people and threatened to drown them if they didn't threaten to drown the government. And so that was another factor. He had an absolutely rigid opposition that was not willing to do anything. I mean, they absolutely came right out and said, we're not going to let him do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he had more obstacles than anybody in living memory. And so that's a piece of it.
Yeah.
And I think that he has worked very hard to try to create some victories wherever he could, of whatever kind he could. And the ACA isn't the healthcare bill is not perfect.
Right.
But it's better. It's a step, and everybody's already talking about, well, this is what we need to do with it next. And if we get the right kind of Congress, maybe we can do that. So I think that people have the idea, it's almost like the white hat, like John Wayne. And when the guy's elected, he's supposed to fix everything. And moreover, we get to sit down and watch him do it. Yeah.
Yeah, the argument that I hear right now is that maybe it would be better to let it all collapse. But I'm not so sure that's a good idea.
I think that's a terrible idea.
I tend to think that if it collapses, you're going to get something that's even a good deal more ugly.
There's a lot of...
Because the people with the guns and the people with the power, are going for more guns and more power, and the rest of us are not going to fare well in that particular environment.
It's absolutely crucial that Obama wins
Yeah.
in this election, because there's all kinds of historical evidence and other kinds of statistical evidence that if the right succeeds, they are going to consolidate their power over the American economy and the American society in a way that we will find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to unlock. And we just can't afford that. And so I don't think having things collapse will be the. I agree with you that what's much more likely to happen is that it will get much worse, and it will get rigid. It will get stuck. We will not be able to unstick it very easily at all. And it's too dangerous. This is, I think, the most dangerous election that I remember.
Well, I'm glad that you went in that direction. I mean, it's a good perspective. We had a show a little while back on voting. Is it worth voting?
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, I think it is. At this point, at a certain level, there's a futility, but it's essential that you participate in it.
That's
in the
right.
sense that they will swap votes, they will cheat, they will do whatever to exclude people, but it does make a difference.
It does make a difference.
And if you don't participate, it will get worse a lot faster, and it getting worse a lot faster may not be what we want to see. There's a very strong anarchist group in this area, anarchist movement, and they're just saying, let it collapse. What comes after it will be better.
No.
I don't think it will be.
No, and I think that you've done so much in terms of building a base for a springboard for more improvements and better responses after the election, that it would be tragic if Obama is not reelected, because you've got a platform at a certain level, and it's a springboard. You could go on and do so much more, but if the right comes in, you're going to find yourself pushed way back.
So we have run out of time, but I want to give one more plug for Susan's book, Move Our Message, and How to Get America's Ear. and she will be doing a couple workshops here over the next couple days. And I want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And see you guys next time on Occupy TV.
Thank you very much.
Catch those, likes those little handshakes at the end.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.